I'm here again at Griffith Park Observatory, below the observatory itself, due to my limited mobility. This is The History of the Dark Matter Motor, by myself, the inventor, David Richard Sanis. Einstein, in 1917, mathematically calculated that a heretofore totally unknown entity, dark energy, had to permeate the universe. Why? Because dark energy had to be omnipresent in the universe as a lambda notation in order to make the mathematics of its general relativity theory coherent. As I would describe it, the compulsive force of gravity had to be balanced by an equal and opposite repulsive force of dark energy. Why? Because Einstein postulated of a cosmological constant, Perrin, a force that opposes gravity and keeps the universe from collapsing, closed Perrin, would maintain the then consensus belief that the universe was static and eternal. By the way, by addenda, that was the key to my figuring out the nature of the universe to the extent that I have and have recorded it. And that key is that there had to be an equal and opposite repulsive force, and that repulsive force had to be constantly repulsive. And that repulsive force is provided in a primary way by dark matter particles, which I have termed, after my granddaughter, Skylar Sanis, to be Skylar particles. Then Hubble discovered that the, quote, nebula, close quote, Andromeda, was not just an interstellar cloud of dust and gas in the Milky Way, it was another and second galaxy. Started to create doubts. Then Hubble discovered that the universe is expanding, and that really it caused trouble. Andromeda and the Milky Way were just two of a great number of galaxies, Perrin, that at the time of this paper number more than 1,453,000,000. So, in 1928, Einstein repudiated his own dark energy cosmological constant. In 1960, I concluded that Einstein's, quote, biggest blunder, close quote, was to renounce his cosmological constant. Of course, I was just then a high school student, a dairy farmer, and part-time goat herder in a Green River Valley out about 35 miles from Seattle, Washington. Notwithstanding that truth, there was a huge obvious truth. The mathematics of Einstein's general relativity were not coherent, absent the repulsive force of dark energy. So, like any other eclecticist autodidact, I decided to solve Einstein's problem with the mathematics of general relativity. Since I was oblivious to the enormity of this task that I had set for myself, I set out with complete confidence to discern if anyone other than Einstein had concluded that, quote, dark energy, close quote, existed in the universe. Less than 1,000 hours of mind-boggling work later, I had found the 1933 work of Fritz Zwicky. Zwicky, Perrin, utilizing a 103-inch Hooker telescope on Mount Wilson, which was then under the control of Edwin Hubble, closed Perrin, had studied a local group of galaxies. Zwicky concluded that this local group of galaxies, the Coma group, by the way, was rotating around the center of the Coma galaxy at a speed many times more than was dictated by their observable masses, according to the then accepted principles of physics and astronomy. Zwicky postulated that this, quote, missing, close quote, mass had to be composed of, quote, dark matter, close quote. Zwicky's work fascinated me because he had also developed superior bomb-making materials for the military forces of the United States. I, of course, as a bomb maker since the age of 12, tended to endorse Zwicky's, quote, dark matter, close quote, conclusions. My research into the, quote, dark matter, close quote, conclusions of Zwicky also led me to the conclusion that Einstein never adopted the conclusions of Zwicky before his death in 1955. I also noted that many of Zwicky's colleagues judged him to be mentally unstable. Then I found that the astronomer John Oort had also concluded that the orbital velocities of stars in the Milky Way did not decrease, paren, in accordance with Keplerian rules of motion, close paren, as they were located at increasing distances from the center of our galaxy. But, as I recall, his results simply led Oort to conclude that his observational discrepancies would be rectified by future developments in astronomy. After this uncontradicted research, I made it my working hypothesis. The dark energy of Einstein, the dark matter of Zwicky, and the dark matter of Oort were consistent and reliable. My working conclusion was that, number one, there was a reason that the orbital velocities of stars did not decrease, paren, in accordance with Keplerian rules of motion, close paren, as they were located at increasing distances from the center of the Milky Way galaxies. 2. The, quote, Schwarzschild solution, close quote, just furnished increasingly closer approximations of an actual precise mathematical solution, which has yet to be discovered. I believe that the scalar particle that I have postulated in my, quote, theory of everything, close quote, will lead to the calculations that eliminate the need for the, quote, Schwarzschild solution, close quote. Number 3. As Einstein had postulated that light was carried by a particle, so was the repulsive, quote, dark energy, close quote, that he mathematically derived in 1917 as the counterbalance to the force of gravitation, as the counterbalance to the force of centrifugal gravity throughout the universe. Number 4. This repulsive centrifugal force that balances both Newtonian gravity and, quote, attraction unique to general relativity, close quote, had to be composed of a particle and a wave. That particle and wave I have named the scalar particle/wave. And 5, I had found why the mathematics of general relativity do not make sense at a quantum level. I eventually had created conclusive evidence by creating the dark matter motor/generator prototype machine. You can see a rendition of this machine at Stern, S-T-E-O-R-N, Orbo. Their January 30th, 2010, successful testing of my dark matter principle. My dark matter motor simplified and tested in Dublin, Ireland. I then turned to a study of everyone involved in electricity and magnetism. Before I volunteered to serve in the United States Army in 1965, I had exhaustively studied the nature and source of compulsive and repulsive forces of permanent magnets. I scoured every scientific reference to the source of the energy of permanent magnets. My work just obtained completely unsatisfactory results. My favorite words about this research came from a physics textbook, co-authored by a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, who wrote, quote, "The permanent magnet is the source of energy of a unique kind," close quote. Well, that's nominative, but it's not explanatory. I was still waiting for that explanation. And eventually, of course, I found it and proved it. In February 1968, I returned from 3 combat tours in Vietnam for the United States Army and the National Security Agency. On February 17, 1968, I was hired by Boeing as an aeronautical engineer in Boeing's multidisciplinary engineering group of last resort. I was named Boeing's Engineer of the Month for February 1968. At that time, Boeing had 104,000 employees, roughly. Within 7 months of being hired by Boeing, I reported only to a committee of Boeing's board of directors and to Malcolm Stamper, Boeing's CEO, and was paid an outrageous sum of money. In 1969, I solved the problem of utilizing weak electromagnets to alternatively combine with powerful permanent magnets in rotary and piston configurations to multiply the input energy as output energy and work, thus defying, of course, the conservation of energy and matter law and an enormous number of other stable laws of physics up to that point. So in 1969, I first contacted one of Seattle's finest intellectual property lawyers, Richard Seed. Mr. Seed believed in my dark matter motor / generator concepts, but he told me that I would play hell in selling my inventions because they defied many of the most famous laws of accepted science. Richard Seed arranged a meeting for me with a man whose inventive genius created the frozen food aisles. Richard Seed arranged for me to talk with a successful inventor, Edward Maher. Mr. Maher had spent a lot of years of study and work before he sold his invention, fish sticks. Maher graduated from Harvard with a degree in chemistry. He worked for General Foods. Fish sticks are a lightly battered, cooked, partially dehydrated, flash frozen food that kept its spices fresh by preserving them in butter. The cell walls of the fish were not mush when thawed out by pan frying because of the partial dehydration. Maher's work led to the huge frozen food sections of supermarkets today. Mr. Maher told me that after the success of fish sticks, he got countless offers to make money. Early in 1970, my scientific research and my building design and construction work were interrupted. Just before I had completed work on the District, a very large nightclub a few blocks from the University of Washington, a powerful bomb exploded at a post office a few blocks away. As a former senior counterintelligence agent back from bomb building work in Vietnam, I decided to solve the bombing mystery and bring the bombers to justice. Meantime, in the early 1970s, Vera Rubin at the Carnegie Institute was telescopically observing and plotting the velocity of stars. Rubin found the velocities of stars did not decrease with increasing distance from galactic centers. Her work defied the Keplerian motion previously proven by all earlier astronomers except for Zwicky and Oort. Rubin's star velocity plots demonstrated that the 60 or so stars whose speed she plotted did not exhibit speed decreases inversely proportional to the square root of radius distances as required by Newton's law of gravity and Keplerian laws. In 1974, Rubin's definitively plotted observations of stars' speeds led her to examine the telescopic observations and conclusions of Fritz Zwicky in 1933. Vera Rubin, as of this date, has not publicly argued against the conclusions of dark matter proposed by Zwicky. Also in 1974, Peebles and Ostraker at Princeton University had published a theoretical argument for the presence of dark matter in the universe. Thus, Einstein, Zwicky, Oort, Rubin, Peebles, and Ostraker all had inadvertently brought dark energy and dark matter to the forefront of astrophysical research. In 1981 and 1982, the actual construction and preliminary testing of my prototype dark matter motor proved that my 5 collaborators and myself had tapped what Tesla called, quote, the very wheelhouse of the universe, close quote. My collaborators and I ran out of money in early 1982. I arranged a meeting with Bill Gates and his partner, Paul Allen, at Microsoft's headquarters. My 5 collaborators refused to share royalties or profits from the manufacture of dark matter motor / generators with anyone other than the 6 of us. I knew that the work was not going to be completed and turned into an actual invention until I could solve the problem of back EMF and eddy current stopping of the dark matter motor within millionths of a second after it was turned on. Temporarily stymied, I set the invention work aside and went to California. Then, in early 2001, I was sitting in a Veterans Administration hospital in Los Angeles. I saw a front-page article in the Los Angeles Times concerning dark energy and dark matter research. It inspired me. So while I waited at the pharmacy to pick up medications I needed as a result of having been gifted with 4 strokes and a few TIAs, the solution to the invention of a dark matter motor flashed into my damaged brain. I had instantly solved the back EMF and eddy current problems. I had lived to invent the most important invention ever, the dark matter motor. From that day to this, I slogged through the problems of trying to convince people that the work of the greatest scientist in the history of this planet must give way to the work of a long-retired dairy farmer and goat herder.